Okay, so basically we are trying to find out these terms. Okay, and actually it's my mistake. I was forgetting this equation. This is already given. Okay, so what do we need here? Partial differentiation of f with respect to x or any variable, and then multiplied, and then you do the square multiplied by the error of that variable divided by the overall error. Okay, Ez. So now if you do the partial differentiation of this function with respect to x, then you will get y, right? So, and then you do the y squared. So this is why we see the square. What is 10? 10 is the error of the x term. Okay. And then this should be divided by the overall error, which is 708.87. Okay, this is how we are getting it. Okay. y is the partial differentiation of the equation with respect to x. Then you do its square multiplied by the error of x, which is given, divided by the overall error. This is what we are doing. Okay, and same thing for this case as well. Here it will be, if you do the partial differentiation of a function with respect to y, you will be getting x squared. Okay, and then the error term of y, which is 5, divided by the overall error. Okay, and instead of y and x, we are using the average values. Okay, so this was y and this is x. And in this case, the partial differentiation with respect to w will be 1. Okay, so it will be simply the error term of w, which is 50, divided by 7, the overall error, which is 708.7. Okay, so I was missing the equation which was already given. Okay, so these are the errors caused, or the, you can say the magnitude of error caused because of each variable. Okay, so out of the overall error, how much is caused because of x, 35.2, how much is caused because of y, 70.5, and how much is caused because of w, this is 0.0705. Okay, so this is a contribution. Now their marginal cost for improvement was also given. So if you take the marginal cost of x, the marginal improvement cost of x, divided by the error caused by it. So to reduce error by each unit, I will have to spend $0.142. Okay, $5, which is the improvement cost for improving the measurement of x, and x is causing how much error in the equation? 35.2. So $5. How much will be the improvement for each reduction in error unit because of x? $0.142. Okay, and 6 is the improvement cost for y, and y is causing 70.05 error in the equation. So 6 divided by 70.05 means that for improving every unit of error, I will have to spend $0.085 on y. Okay, and same thing for w as well. Now, which variable should be selected for improvement? Okay, now if you look at the error, the highest error is caused because of y. Okay, and obviously x, y, and z, they did not define which variables are these. So I cannot, they gave me 2 rules, right? First rule was pick the one with the largest error. The second rule was the one which is most relevant. They are only telling me x, y, and z. So I don't know which one is more relevant. So I cannot apply the second rule here. Okay, those with the largest value of df upon dx. Okay, this is I can do. Okay, but in any case, you know, df by dx and df by dy were almost equal. Okay, when you did df by dy, you got x, and when you did df by dy, you got x, and when you did df by dx, you got y. So the second rule cannot be applied in this case because I have two variables which have the same impact. Okay, so I can decide on the basis of the error. The largest error is caused because of y, and if you look at the costs, the least cost is also because of y. Okay, so if I focus on y, then I can improve the accuracy more than other variables, and it will cost me less than other variables. Okay, so it's a win-win situation. You are improving error more and you are reducing, and the cost is the least. Okay, again, I would like to mention that there were two rules. I applied the first rule because I know the error. The second rule, then whichever has the largest df by dx value, but I have two variables which have almost the same df by dx value. So the second rule cannot be applied. Otherwise, if you want to apply it, then calculate df by dx for each variable, and whichever has the largest value, you can pick that. Okay. Now, if you increase the number of variables in the equation, then each variable has some error. Okay, or each variable will introduce some error in the model. So when you increase the number of explanatory variables, it increases the complexity because now you have more variables in the equation. So the equation will be longer. Okay, to say simply, when you have more variables in the equation will be longer. If I have an equation between only x, y, and w, like I showed you in the previous case, the equation was very simple. But if I have, let's say, equation between 10 variables, so a1, a2, a3, a4, a5, up to a10, the equation will be longer and more complicated. Okay, so it has a chance that it will increase your, sorry, I think there's a mistake here. It should be decreased. Okay, should be decreased. Give me a second. The first, increasing number of explanatory variables, increases the accuracy, but it reduces the specification error. Let me correct it. Would decrease the specification error. You can see it in the graph over here. Okay, so when you have more variables in the equation, it will decrease the specification error, but it will increase the complexity of the model. Okay, and at the same time, it will increase the measurement error. Okay, because when you are measuring 3 variables, so each variable has a measurement error, right? So the final equation had the measurement error because of 3 variables. Okay, now if you make it 10, then now you have 10 measurement errors. Okay, so the final equation will have measurement error coming from 10 sources. Okay, so the model is becoming more complex, and because of that, the accuracy is increasing, but at the same time, you are also increasing the measurement error. So the accuracy is increasing, but not that much. It is increasing, but not that much. You can see it is shown here in the graph as well. This is the overall error. This is the overall error. So you can see there's an optimum value for that. What is that optimum value? Where the number of parameters are at optimum level. Okay, so you try to increase the number of parameters, so the model is becoming more complex. Okay, and specification error is reducing, but the measurement error is increasing. So there will come a time where the summation, the overall impact of measurement error and specification error will produce a minimum result. Okay, so overall error E is a combined result of specification and measurement error. So when you increase model complexity, you decrease ES, but at the same time you are increasing EM. Okay, so that's why we are saying there should be a trade-off between these two things. You try to increase the you try to make the model more complex so that you can increase the accuracy, but not so much that you will increase the measurement error and the overall error is now high. Okay, so you need to find out this optimum value. Okay, and this optimum value will be when the number of parameters are at optimum level. Okay, let us consider this example. The case of having the choice between extremely simple model. So there is already an extremely simple model. Okay, and that model is giving an error of 30%. Okay, that model is not presented here. They are just telling me that there is a model, there is a simple equation for Z, and that equation gives error of 30%. For that equation, I know the error is 30%. Whatever that equation, maybe the equation is Z equals x1 plus x2, maybe. Okay, so now and a new model which has a perfect specification. So perfect specification means the ES is almost zero. The specification error is almost zero, and that perfect specification has this form. Okay, so it's a slightly complicated model, but it will make ES equals to 0. Okay, where xi are independent variables. Okay, and they are, all of them have a measurement error of 0.1, meaning 10%. Each x has a measurement error of 10%. Okay, so for each x, measurement error is 0.1 times x value. Okay, so to decide which equation should I go for, should I go for the simple equation which was giving me 30% error, or should I go for this equation, 30% overall? Okay, 30% is overall. Okay, or should I go for equation which is more complicated and which is making the specification error 0? If they had given me the overall error for this equation as well, then it would have been easy for me. So I need an equation for overall error. I need an equation, or I need the value of overall error with this equation. What will be the value of overall error with this equation? For the previous equation, it is 30%. What is the value for this equation? The procedure is very simple, what we have already done. Okay, which is to apply this. We are basically calculating EZ square, and then we will do under root. Okay, so each time you will take the error for each x. Now error for each x is fixed, 10% of that x value. Okay, so if you want error of x1, it is 0.1 x1. If you want error of x2, it is 0.1 x2. If you want error of x3, it is 0.1 x3. Okay, so E value is 0.1 into the value of the x. Okay, and what is the partial differentiation? Again, the equation is very simple. So the partial differentiation is also very simple. If you take partial differentiation with respect to x1, then x1 will be omitted. If you take partial differentiation with respect to x2, then x2 will be omitted, and so on and so forth. Okay, so so each time you are taking the partial differentiation, doing the square, and then multiplying with the square of the error term. The square of the error term. So for example, when you do the partial differentiation with respect to x1, so you will be left with x2, x3, x4, and x5. Okay, multiplied by error term of x1, which is 0.1x, and square of that, 0.1x square. So x1 square because of the square, and 0.1 square will become 0.01. And since for all variables error is 0.1 of the x value, so 0.1 can be taken with the square as common outside. So this is why you see 0.01 here. 0.01 is basically the square of 0.1, because this is the error for all the x values. So in each term you will have 0.1 multiplied by some x value. Okay, 0.1 square multiplied by some square of the x value. Okay, so 0.1 is taken as outside common, Okay, and then you are left with, so the partial differentiation, this is for x1, so you don't see x1 here. This is for x2, so you don't see x2 here, and so on. And the error term was 0.1 into x squared. So sorry, 0.1 squared into x1 squared. So 0.1 squared is outside, and x1 squared is there. Okay. Now you can see here, in all cases, I have x1 squared, x2 squared, x3 squared, x4 squared, x5 squared. See, the square is here. Okay. And x1 into x2 into x3 into x4 into x5 is equal to what? Equals to z. Okay. So I can combine all these error terms. I can combine all these terms because all of them have x1 into x2 into x3 into x4 into x5, and all of them are square. So instead of writing them 5 times with a square, I can simply write z square. Okay, z square into 5. Okay, each term is what? x1 square into x2 square into x3 square into x4 square into x5. Because the error, when you did the partial differentiation, x1 was omitted, and then when you multiplied with the error term, x1 came back with a square. Okay, so x1 square into x2 square into x3 square into x4 square into x5 square means basically z square. So each of these terms is basically z square, and they are 5 terms. So 5 times z square. So 0.01 into 5 times z square will become 0.05 z square. Okay, if you want, I can write it here. Okay, so 0.01 remains outside, and then you have 5 times x1 square, x2 square, x3 square, x4 square, and x5 square. Okay, so this whole thing is equal to z square, because z is this without a square. So this is 5 times z square, and then if you multiply 5 with 0.01, it will become 0.05 z square. Okay, so 0.0, and then you since this is the equation for error square, when you take the under root, it will become the equation for error, like we did for the last example. Okay, so when you take the under root of this one, 0.05 under root will become 0.22, and z square will become z. So 0.22 z means what? Error is 22% of z. Error is 22% of z. The previous simple equation was giving 30% of error. This equation is giving only 22% error. So obviously we should go with this equation. This has less error. Okay, so you made the specification error 0. You increased the measurement error, but in the end, the combined effect is that the overall error reduced from 30% to 22%. Okay, so that's why you should select this model. Okay, now this is again because the error term was 10%. Okay, if you increase the error term from 10% to 20%, so instead of 0.1, you will have 0.04 maybe. I think 0.04. Okay, because the square of 0.1 was 0.01, so the square of 0.2 is 0.04. Okay, so this sum will become 0.04, and then you do the same calculation. So 5 into 0.04 will become 0.2 z square. Okay, and what is the under root of 0.2? What is the under root of 0.2? It will be this much, I think, because they've already written it. So it will be 0.445. The square root of 0.2 will be 0.445. Okay, so it depends upon the measurement error. With 10% measurement error, using this equation is better. Okay, if you increase the measurement error, then you have to decide again. You do the calculation and decide whether you should use this equation or the previous one. Okay. Okay, in some cases, the data which you are collecting is not good. Okay, so if you make a model more complicated, then you are putting more variables which have high measurement error. In that case, having a less complex model will be better for you. Okay, in some cases, you are trying to make the model, you are trying to put more variables in the equation. The model is becoming more complex. Your purpose or your thinking is, if the model is more complex, I will have better accuracy. But the problem is with your data collection. The data which you are collecting has a large, or the data which you are collecting has large measurement errors. So when you increase the number of variables, each variable is bringing its own measurement error into the equation. So in that case, it may be more efficient for you to have a simpler model which has less variables, so that the number of measurement errors into the equation will be less, and you will have less overall error as well. Okay, so you can see they have presented the case for a poor country and a rich country. Okay, and you can see the rich country meaning that the data their data collection is better. For poorer country, the data collection is not so good. Okay, so in both cases they are using the same model and they are trying to decrease the specification error, but because of the measurement error, the poor country has overall higher error than the rich country. Okay, and this is because of basically the measurement error. Okay, but if you want to learn about what is happening with you want to learn about the phenomena of the choice of the people, or what is the actual reason that this thing is happening, then a better specified model will be preferable. Okay, a model which is better specified, which has more complexity, but it is giving like it has less specification error. Okay, so to understand, to decrease the error, in some cases with high measurement errors, if you cannot invest more in measurement, then it is better recommended to have, or it is more recommended to have a simpler model. But if you want to see why I'm getting these results, what is the effect of this variable on the output and what is the effect of this variable on the output, then you should go for a more complicated model. Okay, when you are choosing a model for forecasting, you want to have an equation which can give you some forecasting for future. Okay, then in that case, you should be putting those variables in the equation which can be forecasted with greater confidence. Meaning what? For example, I want to forecast the traffic growth rate. Okay, now traffic growth rate depends upon income, it depends upon weather conditions, it depends upon many other things. Okay, so there are many things which I can put into the model. But as you know, and I know as well, forecasting weather is relatively easier as compared to forecasting other things. Weather forecasts are very normal. You can look into, there are many websites which are doing that. Okay, so putting weather into the equation, which will be used for future forecast, is better for me as compared to putting, let's say, income. I'm not saying that you take income out in all cases, but if you have to make a choice, then the choice should be made for the variable which has more chances of having an accurate value for future as compared to other variables. Okay, so for example, you take variable of income, but many things can happen with the economy, with the people, and your forecast for income may not be completely true. But whether there are less chances that some drastic changes can happen with the weather which cannot be forecasted. Even if changes happen, there are many scientists available which can still give you weather forecast with more accuracy. So having that variable will be more beneficial for you for future forecasting. Okay, same thing for other variables as well. You want to put a variable for income, and there's another variable for, let's say tourism. With the COVID situation, you don't know anything about tourism, but what will happen to it. But predicting income is relatively easier. So income will have more preference than tourism in that case, if you have a choice. If you have a choice. Okay, the data collection methods depend upon these things. How would you collect data? It depends upon these things. First of all, the type of model which you need. Okay, are you building a linear model, or are you building a logarithmic model, or the model will be between which variables, and so on and so forth. Okay, so you must have some idea of what type of equation you are trying to develop, and that will affect your data collection method. The factors which you should consider is the length of the study, okay, and the study horizon. How long the study should take, how much time you have for the study, and the study horizon. Study horizon meaning after how much time the data will be used. After how much time the data will be used. Okay. So for example, if you are doing a design which will be implemented after a couple of years, so you need the results very quick and very fast, and you know exactly what you want. 2 years is not a long horizon. Okay, so you may use a technique which will give you that data specifically, okay, which is quick and which is focused on a particular parameter. But if you are doing a strategic planning study, so your data will be used for 20 years or 30 years of planning, then in that case many things can change in 20-30 years. So in that case, your data collection technique should have some flexibility. Data which you are collecting should have some flexibility, because if after 5 or 6 years you need something else, that should be part of the data already. Okay. Limits of the study area. Okay, now a study area depends upon the type of project or the area of the project. Okay, so if I'm going to build a highway, okay, so the areas in which that highway will go through is my study area, right? Okay, but I know people on that highway may come from other areas as well. So your study area may be larger than the area of the project. In many cases, especially for transportation studies, because people are moving, right? So even if you take an airport or a railway station or a railway line or a highway or a bridge, whatever, the area of the project will be most of the time shorter or smaller than the area of the study, because we want to study travelers which are coming even from different areas to my project. Okay, and this happens. Study resources, how many people you have, what skill levels you have for the people. Okay, do you need permissions from the authorities? Okay, last year some students were trying to get data from the airport, they couldn't get it. Okay, they were basically looking for permission to collect data on the airport. They were just asking for permission to stand inside the airport and just observe. They were observing noise levels. Okay, so they were not bothering anyone. But COVID happened, right? So with COVID, they couldn't even get the permission to stand inside the airport. Okay, so this is then they relied on some other things then. Modern technological solutions, do you have them available with you? Mobile tracking, vehicle tracking. Okay, we did a study using vehicle tracking data in Europe. Okay, and the name of the project, I think I told you earlier as well. Track and Know. Track and Know. You search for it, you will find it. So they are doing a whole research project on the basis of tracking data. The trackers are inside the vehicle, and obviously our vehicles also have trackers for safety and so on, but those trackers are recording the data, and the data is accessible to the university in Belgium, and they are using that to calculate everything. Okay, the types of surveys you can have. Origin destination, OD means origin destination. Okay, origin destination and household surveys. Okay, and in that case you will need, if you are doing origin destination or household travel surveys, you will need you will need to conduct household survey, meaning you will go to different households and you will ask them questions. household survey. You may also be required to do intercept surveys. Intercept surveys are basically done at the boundaries of the area. The boundary is known as cordon. Okay, a boundary is known as cordon. Okay, so with the household survey, you may be required to do cordon counts as well. Okay, intercept surveys, how many people are entering your area and how many are leaving, and who are entering, from where they're coming, and those who are leaving, to which area they are moving out. Okay, and then you can do intercept surveys for internal cordons as well. So you may divide your area into smaller zones. Okay, so within between each zone there will be a cordon. Okay, so this is my entire area. This ellipse is my entire area, and then within this area you may develop a smaller zones. Okay, this is very common. We never ever do the study of an entire area as one area. We divide them into smaller zones. So internal cordon means how many people are crossing between the zones within the same area. Okay, and the screen lines are basically these lines. These lines are known as screen lines. Okay, you may do a counting survey at these locations. You may conduct travel time surveys. Okay, and other relevant data includes land use inventory, what type of land use you have in this area, what infrastructure you have, what services you have, bus services, bus stops, metro services, and information on attitudes and elasticities. Okay, we have discussed them earlier as well, but this information may come from previous surveys. This particular sort of data may come from other departments of the government. For example, Ministry of Works in Bahrain may have a record of infrastructure and existing services. Okay, economics department may have information about elasticity and attitudes of the people and so on and so forth. Okay. Now the scope of the survey may include, for example, if this is your area for which you are doing the study, then there can be trips which have origin and destination both outside your area. They are just crossing your area. Okay, they are just crossing your area. Okay, so you need to consider them because they are still becoming part of the traffic of your area, right? So you need to consider these people. Then you need to consider people who are either coming from outside, so their origin is outside but their destination is in the area, or vice versa. Their origin is the area and their destination is outside the area. Okay, so non-residents who are taking a trip from outside. And then we have movements of residents, people who live inside the area and they are going somewhere outside. And then we have people who are within the area. Okay, so we have passers-by, people who are just passing from the area. Then we have non-residents which are coming to the area. Then we have residents which are going out of the area. And then we have residents which are moving within the area. So all this information should be collected in a survey. In a transportation survey, all this information should be collected because all these people are part of the travel demand of your area. So all of them should be considered. Okay, and this is why I said that the study area may be larger than the project area. Okay, for household surveys, these are some points which we should keep in mind. The questions should be simple and direct. We don't want to waste time for our respondents and we don't want to confuse them. I already gave you the example of my survey when I asked them for trip time and they were saying 2 days and 3 days. Make sure the question, each question serves as a specific purpose. Okay, if you ask one type of information in multiple questions, it is usually annoying for the respondent. For example, you want to ask about his travel time. Okay. Now, if you ask how much was your waiting time, how much time you took for how much time you took to take your car out of the garage, or how much time you took to go from your house to the bus stop. Now all this is part of what? All this is part of travel time. If you ask him the travel time directly, it is easier, or it is higher probability that you will get more answers. Okay, but if you ask information in batches, in stages, so eventually you will add all of them to get the travel time, but the user doesn't know that, the respondent doesn't know that. He will get irritated, and he may try to fill it quickly and try to get rid of you. All right, just I just want to finish this as soon as possible. There's so many questions, so you will increase the number of questions as well in this manner. Minimize number of open-ended questions. Okay, so open-ended means, for example, if I ask you what is your age, and then I give a blank, this is open-ended. I ask you about your income, I give a blank, open-ended. But if I ask you about your age, and then I give you options, is your age between 0 and 10, 10 and 20, 20 and 30? This is easier to answer. Okay, it will take less time because the user is only clicking it or just ticking it, and it is it is found to be more convenient for the travelers to fill in the questions which have options. Okay, so multiple choice questions are easier than blank questions. Okay, like questions with a blank. The travel information must include the purpose of traveler, purpose of trip. Why did you make the trip? Because it is very important. Some trips
this came back from a search.
I don't know what happened. Okay, so the purpose of the trip is very easy because very important because it affects a lot of things. Okay, even your mode choice, where you are going, which route you are taking, many of these things depend upon your purpose. If you are doing something for shopping, okay, then you may take a different route. If you are doing the same thing for a work trip, then your route and your timing will be different. Collect information so that complete tours can be reconstructed. Okay. For example, you ask him, where did you go in the morning, first of all? So he will say, I went to work. Okay, or I went to a school to drop my kid. And then from there, where did you go? And he will say, I went to my office. Then from there, where did you go? He will say, I went back to the school, and so on. So for each part of his journey, then you will ask him, what was your trip time? What was your mode choice? What was your route choice? And so on and so forth. Okay. Why this is important? Because sometimes, or most of the times, people plan their trips in batches, in a group. Okay, so if I'm going somewhere in the morning, I will have my next trips in my mind, and the first trip which I'm taking can be affected by the other trips which I will take later on. Okay, so for example, I have to go somewhere in the evening with my family, then I may go somewhere else in the morning to get some work done, because in the evening I may not have the time. Okay, so usually people decide about their trips on daily basis and in the form of groups. So if you take the complete tour of the day, from the information for the complete tour of the day, then it may help you understand why did he take this road and not this road. Why did he take a car and he could have gone walking? Okay, so for example, if I say I went to the mosque in my car, okay, the mosque is 2 minutes away from my house. Why would I take a car? Maybe after the mosque I have to go to some place else, and that place I cannot go walking. Okay, so this happens a lot. Okay, so this is why take information about the complete trips, a complete tour of the entire day, and you can reconstruct it, what happened first, what happened next, and so on and so forth. include all modes of travel, including non-motorized modes. Okay, walking, bicycles. Okay, these are non-motorized. Motorized, everything else is motorized. Non-motorized is bicycles and walking. Okay, so usually walking trips are neglected. You shouldn't do that. Even if you took some trips by walking, they should be part of your survey. All people should be included in the household, even if they are not members of the family, like maids and servants and so on. Like I said, that you need travel information about the entire day. It may be difficult for people to remember each and every detail of their trip when you come for collecting the data. Okay, so you ask me, what did you do 2 days ago? I may not remember. Okay, what was your travel time? Where did you go first? I may not remember. I may not remember at that time. Okay, so what they say is you give them a diary or something like that. So whenever they make a trip, they will record in the diary. Okay, and when you come for data collection, they will keep looking at the diary and they will give you the information. Okay, so this is what they call as activity recall framework. Okay, so it's like a diary where you are not recording everything which is required, but it will help you to remember things later on. Okay. So on Sunday, the first trip was from here to here. Then the next trip was from here to here. So on. Simple information. Okay. You will go and collect more information, but the diary or the activity recall framework will help them remember things. Okay. You should tell the household when you are going to collect the data. Okay, or for which day you are going to collect the data. Okay, and like I said, you should give them a brief diary in advance so that they record some of the information in that diary in advance. Okay, and then the data can be transferred from the diary to a self-completed questionnaire. Like you give them the questionnaire, they will record it, they will write it down themselves, or you can interview them. Okay, but fix the day of the travel so that you know which day he's talking about. Okay, maybe he's talking about a weekend and you want the data about a weekday, so it helps you with that. Try to collect the data with maximum level of disaggregation. Okay, disaggregation means detail. Okay, detail in terms of the location. Okay, the location. Now the data can be, for example, you say this data is for the entire zone, so this is aggregated. But if you say this data is for this household, this is disaggregated. So try to be as disaggregate as possible. So if you have one building and that building you have 10 flats, 10 apartments, so disaggregate for the data or keep the data for each apartment separately. Okay, it can happen that you don't have the time or the resources and you say, okay, entire building data is one unit. Okay, so this will be aggregation. It obviously it will affect your accuracy. Okay, there are two parts of the household survey: personal and household characteristics and identification, and trip data. So personal and household characteristics include the relationship, mainly the relationship of the person with the head of the household. This is one thing. Okay, what is his or her relationship with the head of the household? Wife, son, father, brother. Okay, what is the gender, age? Does they have a driving license? What is their educational level? What is their occupation, income, and many other things. Okay, so these are some points mentioned just to give you an idea what information you can include in the personal and household characteristics. Okay, and then you can also include socioeconomic data. For example, what type of house you have. Is it a villa, apartment, palace? Obviously people in palace don't answer household service, right? They are special. How many and what type of vehicles you have. Okay, who owns the house and how much is the family income. So all these are part of personal and household characteristics. Then we have trip data. Trip data meaning what is a trip? Any movement which you make outside the house, that is a trip. Okay, whether you are going to a cold store or a mosque, or just to meet your friend, okay, or just to meet your neighbor, all of them are trips. Whenever you go outside the boundary of your house, that is a trip. Okay, so trip of information can be gathered. So first thing you need to gather is purpose. I've already mentioned it. This is the most important part that you have to find out. Okay. Then one trip may have multiple stages. One trip may have multiple stages. For example, you may walk to your friend's house, and then you may take you may share a car with him to go to someplace else. Okay, so each stage consists of a part of the trip in which your mode didn't change. So whenever you go from one mode of travel to another mode of travel, that is a change of stage. So a trip may have been completed in stages. Okay, so for each stage you must find out. Obviously, if there is no change in mode, that means the complete trip was one stage. If you have multiple modes, then you have multiple stages. For each stage, find out origin and destination. Okay, an origin destination may not mean the exact location. It may mean any nearby or the reference to any nearby landmark. So if you say city center, that is enough for me, maybe. Okay, because city center, you may not have gone inside city center. You may have gone to the building which is in front of the city center, but city center is enough for me. Okay, or if you say, for example, that bridge, okay, pedestrian bridge on Sheikh Salman Highway, that particular pedestrian bridge, Sheikh Salman Highway, it is enough. Okay, so but you must have an idea from where did each stage begin and where it ended. Okay, so origin destination, what was the purpose of the trip, the start time, end time, what mode you used in that stage, the cost of travel for that stage, and there can be other things as well. Okay, but everything related to that stage of the trip. Okay, so these are the two main parts of any household survey. Okay, so I've already mentioned the scope. Okay, so how do you collect the sample? We have already discussed the how to find out number of samples and how to do stratified sampling and so on. But for doing that, you must know the population, and the population data can be taken from census. Okay, they are government organizations which take population data on regular basis. Okay, and they publish it. Okay, so whichever census is the most updated one, you take the data from that. Okay, in case of transportation, we have the luxury that most of the times our client is a government organization. Transportation projects are managed by government organizations. Okay, so you may ask them to give you updated data even if it is not published. Okay, usually the census data is published after 5 years, 10 years. Okay, but it is collected every year. So if your client is a government organization, you may ask them, I need this data, and they can give it to you, even if it is not published. Okay, but whatever the most updated data is, take that one. Okay, try to get the most updated data about the population. Okay, and I've already mentioned that you are trying to cover travelers who are just passing by, residents and non-residents, residents going outside, non-residents coming inside, and residents who are just moving around in the area. You need data about all of them. So you cannot just take the data of this area and that's it. Okay, so for non-residents, people who are not living in your area, for people who are living in your area, you can collect data yourself. You can collect data from the government, from any organization. But people who are not living in your area, for them, you can take a list of these people, from dwellings or accommodations which are non-private, hotels, okay, and rest houses, guest houses. Okay, so if somebody who is non-resident, if he comes in the area, where would he live? He will live in a hotel. Okay, so you take the data from these dwellings, from these locations. So they will give you an idea about the people who are non-residents. Okay, you can also take a list from interchanges where people are likely to come when they are entering or leaving the area. For example, airports, train stations, okay, those airports and train stations which are used by non-residents. Okay, so you can get the data from there as well. So it will help you to know how many non-residents I should be collecting the data and from where they are coming. Okay, or you can obtain the data from external cordons. So you go to these external cordons and you do your own survey. You ask people from where they are coming, whether they are resident or non-resident. Okay, so these are the different sources of data about non-residents. Okay, for residents, I said it is relatively easy. You can rely on the government sources as well. Okay, how to calculate the sample size? We have actually discussed this equation earlier as well, but in an example. So in that example, the values were fixed. Okay, but this is a general equation. CV is coefficient of variation. Z alpha is a standard normal value for confidence level which you require from the data. Okay, standard normal is a normal distribution. We have discussed it in the last topic as well. So we have a Z table. If you go to the slides of the last topic, you will see the Z table as well. Okay, and I told you that normally we assume that whatever data we are collecting follows a normal distribution. So that's why we are using Z alpha here. So you will define what is your alpha, how much confidence level you require in your sample, and then you will take the value of Z for that alpha. Okay, and normally our confidence level is 95%, and for that the Z value is 1.96. Okay, if you want to check it, go back to the slides of the previous topic, you will find it there. And E is the error which you are allowing in your measurement. E is the error which you are allowing in your measurement. Now what is CV, coefficient of variation? I mentioned it in the last lecture as well. Coefficient of variation. Anyone remembers? What is coefficient of variation? How do I calculate coefficient of variation? Anyone remembers that? No one? Okay, so go and check and you tell me, otherwise this will come in the exam, inshallah. Okay, let's assume we want to measure the number of trips per household in our area, and we have the data about coefficient of variation for the variable which you want to collect for various location in USA. Okay, so for example, you want to collect number of trips per household, and they already did this exercise maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Okay, now coefficient of variation is something which doesn't change with time. Okay, and this is more the reason that you should go back and find out what is coefficient of variation which doesn't change with time. Okay, but interesting thing about coefficient of variation is that in the same population, unless there is a very significant change, the coefficient of variation doesn't change. Okay, it remains the same. So whether if you collect data from Bahrain right now and you calculate its coefficient of variation, and then you do the same thing after 5 years, the data may change, but the coefficient of variation will remain the same for the two data sets. Okay, so they are doing the survey for Pennsylvania and New Hampshire and Baltimore, and for these areas and even for the entire USA as well, they have coefficient of variations available to them. Okay, so whatever area they are selecting for their calculations right now, it is similar to these areas, and it is obviously part of USA as well. So they are saying use these coefficient of variations and tell us how many samples we should collect. Okay, so I needed coefficient of variation, which is already given now. Okay, they did not give me one value, multiple values. Okay, and then I need the Z alpha. For that, I must fix alpha. How much confidence I need? For example, I need 95% confidence. Okay, now just as a reminder, let me show you the Z table as well. Yeah, okay, so this is a Z table, and these are the probabilities. Okay, so if you select alpha as 95%, so 95% is between these two values. Okay, and how do you read the values? The first two digits from the first column and the second decimal place from the top row. Okay, so this one is 94.95% and this is 95.05%. Okay, this value is 1.6 and the top, how do I move it? Okay, moved. Okay, so 1.64, okay, gives me 94.95%, and 1.65 gives me 95.05%. Okay, so if you take the midpoint of them, you will get exactly 95.00%. Okay, so 1.64 and 1.65, the midpoint will be 1.645. Okay, so the Z value at 95% alpha is 1.645. Okay, this is what they are saying here, 1.645. Okay, and for coefficient of variation, you can take the average. You can take the average. Okay, but they are saying some values are less than 1, some values are slightly more than 1. So the average will be close to 1. Okay, so the average will be close to 1. Okay, if the values are close to 1, then it is understandable, or it is allowed to assume the average to be exactly 1. CV, assuming coefficient of variation to be 1, is allowed if the data, even if the data is close to 1. So even if the actual value, if you take the average of these 4 values, you may not get a value which is exactly 1. You may not get it, but this is fine. Okay, in most of the cases, CV is 1. So even if the data is close to 1, if the data is giving you CV close to 1, you can round it off to 1, no problem. So even if the actual value was, let's say, 0.98 or 0.99 or 1.01, assuming 1 is safe, reasonable. Okay, but should be close enough. Okay, the data is telling you CV is 1.5 or 2, and then you are assuming 1, that is wrong. But in this case, if you take the average, you will be getting very close to 1. Okay, so assuming 1 is not a problem. Okay, so if you want to calculate the number of samples, then it will be n equals CV, I'm taking 1, into Z squared, so 1.645 square upon E square. So E is normally E is taken as 10%. Okay, E is normally taken as 10%. 10% error. Okay, So this will become 0.1 square or 0.01. So how much n you have here? What is the value of n?
Four, Doctor.
4. You are dividing by 0.01. 1.645 square divided by 0.01. It cannot be 4. It must be in hundreds. 1.645 square divided by 0.01. How much? So 1.645 square into 100. How much?
270.6.
271. Okay, 271. Let us take it 271. That is fine. Obviously, this is minimum, so you round it off. So 271. Okay, so these are basically normal values, 95% confidence and 10% error. These are normal values, but it can change. Okay, CV was the only thing which you needed from the last year. Okay, let's say we have okay, continuous surveys. Continuous survey means what? You collected data from this year, okay, and then you repeat the survey in subsequent years as well. This is what normally happens at the government level. Okay, government organizations usually collect their data in continuous form. So it will not happen that they will collect data now and then for the rest of the 20 years they will not collect the data again. They collect data on regular basis, and this is how they can calculate the trends, the growth rates. Okay, they can compare between different years and so on. This is how they can do it. Okay, so continuous data is the normal practice in the government sector. Okay, so for example, you collect 15,000 household data in year 1. Okay, and you prepare a model using those 15,000 values. Next year, you collect 5,000 more values from the same population. So now your total is 20,000. Your total is 20,000. So now you can update your model with 20,000 values. And then in the next year, you will have 5,000 more. So you will have 25,000 values and you will keep on updating the model. Okay. So what are the advantages of doing continuous survey? First of all, the quality of the data will be very high, especially if you are using trained people. And obviously, if you are going to do survey multiple times, then it will make more sense to train people to do that. If I'm going to do survey for once in the entire life, then why should I bother about training people? Okay, and or selecting trained professionals for that. Okay, I will try to minimize my cost, but I know if I select trained people and they will keep on collecting data for me, so with each data collection effort, these people are getting better and the data quality will also be improving. Okay, and in this case, for continuous surveys, usually the budget is approved for 5-6 years in advance. Okay, so it will not happen that now you need to collect data and there is no budget for you, because the budget is already approved initially when you were doing this data collection for the first year. Okay, and it also provides time series data. So like I said, you can compare between year 1 and year 2, year 1 and year 3, and so on and so forth. So this is what we call as time series. Time series means data collected multiple times. Okay, so you can see how the people are changing their mode because of changes in car ownership, because of pollution levels, because of land use patterns. Okay, or how the mode choice is changing because of improvement in pedestrian facilities, improvement of public transport. Okay, so these things can be only seen if I have data for multiple times. Okay, so this year the transportation network was not good. Next year they made it better, so I have the data for this year and the next year. I can compare, okay, and I can know if there was a change in the mode choice of the people because of bus network improvement or not. Okay, when you are doing the continuous surveys, you should make sure that the data from different years, second year and the other years, is integrated with the data from the first year in terms of household, vehicle, and persons and trips. Okay, like it should match. Okay, the number of households you have collected in the first year, it should have some distribution or almost the same distribution in the remaining years as well. Okay, same thing with the number of vehicles as well, number of persons as well, number of trips as well. Okay, so you have to make sure that there is some confirmation, there is some consistency between the data of the first year and the data of the remaining years. Why we are focusing on the first year? Because in the first year you are collecting more data. You are collecting 15,000 because in the first year this is initial year. Okay, so it will help you in the remaining years. So you collect the data, more data in the first year. So you make sure in the remaining years it is consistent. Okay, you should collect the sample carefully. Okay, to ensure that 15,000 households in year 1 are representative of the city. So year 1 is the most important one. If your data from year 1 was faulty, then it will show, or it will destroy the remaining calculations as well. Okay, then you have to make sure that the data in year 2 and the subsequent years is also representative of the city. Okay, so each year the data should be collected representative of the city or of the area. Okay, and then there should be some consistency between one year and the other years as well. Okay. Then another method, so up till now we have talked about household surveys. Then we have roadside interviews as well. Okay, roadside interviews are more efficient if you just want to collect data about origin destinations. So we call, when you represent origin destination in a matrix, we call them trip matrices. Okay, so a trip matrix is a matrix in which you are showing number of trips from one origin to other destinations and vice versa. Okay, origin destination table or trip matrix, same thing. It means the same thing. Okay, so if you are only focusing on origin destination data from where the people are going and where from where people are coming, where they are going, then roadside interviews are more efficient as compared to household interviews. Okay, they obviously you are doing it on the side of the road, so you will collect more samples in less time. Okay, and obviously then you have to reduce the number of questions as well because of the location, right? You cannot stop people for a long time on the roadsides. Okay, a household, easier, people are in the house, they are more willing to answer your questions, so on. So the limited set of questions, but 3 important questions: origin, destination, purpose. Okay, purpose coming again. See, well-trained interviewers can add to data collection. Okay, people who are trained enough that they will fill out some of the details themselves by looking at the respondent. Okay, the most obvious thing is gender, right? You don't need any training for that. Okay, you can know the gender. So in your questionnaire you are marking the gender as well. Some are trained enough to know the age group as well. Okay, and believe me, you cannot do it with Chinese then. Okay, I can never know what's the exact age of a Chinese person. Okay, so there you need to ask them. Okay, but a well-trained interviewer, maybe get people from China in that case, can fill out some of the extra details by just looking at or by observing the respondent. Okay, roadside interviews need a lot of organization, permissions, safety issues. Okay, so this is a disadvantage then. Okay, you have to arrange the people who will come on the same time and where they will stop where they will stand, how they will manage the papers and the pen and the stationery. Okay, so it's very hectic. I have done it. It's very hectic. So you are stopping people randomly. Most important thing here, randomly, not people who are looking friendly to you. Randomly, anyone. Okay, maybe he's angry, but still you have to stop them. Random the corresponding number of vehicles, the number of vehicles you have decided. I will interview and interview all their passengers, all of them. Okay, so 3 passengers, you interview all 3 of them. In case of public transport, if you are doing the roadside interviews for public transport, then you can do it in the vehicle. In the vehicle, because obviously people are not driving. So you can sit inside the bus and you can ask them the questions. And it will obviously reduce the error, reduce the safety issues and so on and so forth. Okay, let us assume a control point where n cars cross and we wish to take a sample of n vehicles. So n is the total number of vehicles which cross, and n is small n is the number of vehicles which we want to ask questions to. Okay. Let us say that out of these n vehicles, x1 is the number of vehicles which are traveling from origin to destination 1, any particular area to destination 1 area. So out of this sample, x1 are the number of people who are traveling from here to here. Okay. Then x1 becomes a geometric distribution. Okay, we have already discussed geometric distribution in the last topic. Okay, so x1 becomes a geometric distribution with depending upon these variables n, n1 and n. What is n? Capital N, total number of cars. What is capital N1? Actual number of cars traveling between origin and destination 1. And what is the small n? The number of cars which you have interviewed. Okay. So if you go back to geometric distribution helps you to find out the probability of getting x1 successes in n trials. Okay, this is the rephrasing of the problem in terms of geometric distribution. I want to find out the probability that I will get x1 cars of this type in n cars, small n cars. Okay, so this is the purpose of geometric distribution, to find out the number of successes in a specific number of trials. Okay, so n1 is a, okay, I already explained it. So expected value of x1 according to geometric distribution is this, n into p, where n, small n, is the sample size and p is actual number of travelers between these two areas divided by the total number of cars crossing the station. And the variance of x1 is again equal to this, and again both these are coming from the geometric distribution equations from the last topic. Okay, now if you assume that x1 follows normal distribution, or x1 can be normally approximated, okay, then the distribution of x1 can be given by this equation, okay, where np is what? The expected value, and what is this whole thing? The variance. And if you remember, this is how you show that some parameter follows normal distribution. The notation for showing normal distribution is this: x follows normal distribution, so you write n here. Okay, then within bracket you write the mean, mu is the mean, so in this case mean is expected value np, and then you write the variance. So for geometric distribution, mean is equal to np and variance is equal to this whole thing. So this is how we have written it. Okay, now so p is the actual proportion of travelers who are traveling between O and D1. And what is the proportion of travelers who are traveling between O and D1 in the sample? That is this one. Okay, so you can see x1, number of people who travel between O and D1 in the sample, and small n is the total number of cars you have interviewed in the sample. Okay, so again, if you say that p not also follows normal distribution, then this is the this is how you represent it. Okay, so P is the expected value, and this is the variance for P. Okay, and if you want to calculate the confidence interval for P, okay, P cap basically, not P cap. Okay, so if you want to calculate the confidence interval for P cap, then it can be calculated with this range. Okay, so P cap, the expected value that you will find a traveler between O and D1 in the sample, minus this whole thing. Now what is this whole thing? Z is a standard normal value at your confidence level, how much confidence level you want, into this. What is this? This is the variance. Okay, this is the variance. So Z, sorry, not variance, standard deviation. Standard deviation. So Z into standard deviation. And so this is the lower limit for P cap, and the upper limit will be with a plus sign. Okay, so the lower limit is with minus sign, upper limit with plus sign. So mean or expected value plus this whole thing, and the thing which you see in the square root here is basically this whole square root is the standard deviation. The whole square root is the standard deviation. And what is Z? The standard normal value, like I showed you from the Z table, at your confidence level. At your confidence level. Okay. So this square bracket gives you the range of P cap for your sample data. Okay. So the probability that any car will belong to O and D1 in the sample has 95% chance of it being in this range. Any car belonging to O and D1 in the sample has 95% probability of being in this range. For example, you calculate this value, it comes out to be, let's say, 70%. Okay, you calculate this value and it comes out to be, let's say, 80%. Okay, so if you collect any data from this location, there is between 70 to 80% chance, there is 95% chance that the percentage of drivers going between O and D1 will be in this range. There's 95% chance that percentage of drivers who are going from O to D1 is between 70 and 80%. Okay, I'm saying 95% because you are taking the Z value for 95%. If you take the Z value for 90%, then there's 90% chance that the percentage of drivers between these two areas will be between 70 and 80%. Okay, so I've already explained it. And this, and E can be, okay. So E is basically the Z into standard deviation is what we call as the error. Z into standard deviation, the thing which you are adding and subtracting, is what we call as the error. Okay, so error equals this entire thing. The error equals this entire thing. So you want to keep the error within this limit. So if you say 10%, then you will put this entire thing equal to or less than 10%. If you are allowing error of 20%, then you will put this entire thing equal to 20%. Okay, so how much error you are allowing? Okay, so if you can fix the value of E, then you can rearrange this equation to give you the value of N. Okay, you can rearrange this equation to give the value of N. So E will come on this side, everything else, N will go on the other side. So this is a rearranged equation. Okay, and then you can take this value and put it in the denominator, or you can open the brackets and so on. So this will be equal to this. Okay, now in this when you open the bracket, you will get, sorry, this, yeah, when you, so you open the bracket and, you rearrange the value. This is the final equation for getting the value of n. Okay, so if you put normal values for n, e, and z, the p of 50% will give you the highest number of n. Okay, if you keep all the values same in this equation and just keep on changing the p value, then the p value of 50% will give you the highest value of n. Whatever value of e and z and n, capital N, you are choosing, you will get the maximum value of n when the p is 50%. Okay, so when there is equal chance of a traveler to be in one zone and not be in the other zone, then you will get the maximum number of samples. Okay, so in this equation, the maximum for getting the maximum number of responses, p should be 50%. Okay, so it is a normal practice that if you don't know the exact value of p, then you assume the best one, which is 50%. Okay, if you don't know the exact value of p, how many travelers are actually traveling between O and D1, then you assume p to be 50%, because this, this will give you the highest value of n. Okay, so using this equation, you can try different values of, you can keep z for 95% confidence, which is 1.96, and you can keep e as 0.1. Okay, so e and z are fixed, and then you can calculate, you can put the value of n, capital N, how many people are traveling from the station. Remember, n is number of cars which are traveling from your observation point. Okay, and you can calculate the value of n, small n. Okay, so again we are putting p for maximum 0.5, e is assumed to be 0.1, and z for 95% confidence is assumed to be 1.96. Okay, so you can keep on changing the values of n, and you can calculate n value, small n, how many cars are traveling and how many cars you should observe. Okay, so this is a table for that, and then depending upon that, you can calculate what percentage of cars you are observing from the total. So if there are 100 cars crossing, and so the n comes out to be 49, and that means you are collecting data for 49% of the drivers. Out of total drivers, you are collecting data for 49% of drivers. If capital N is 200, then small n will be 65, and then you will be collecting the data for only 32.5% of the drivers. So 65 upon 200. Okay, this last column is basically small n upon capital N. So 32.5% of the drivers. Okay, and so on. So you can see, as the total number of drivers is increasing, the percentage of drivers you are observing is becoming less and less. Although small as n is increasing, but it is not increasing by the same rate as the total number, because otherwise this percentage will remain constant, right? If a small n and capital N will increasing by the same amount, this percentage will remain constant, but it is not. That means n is increasing with respect to capital N, but not by the same ratio. If you have variation in flow, so you are collecting data in different times of the day, and obviously we know in different times of the day the flow is different. Okay, so in that case, you can use this as a guideline. Okay, so for example, when the flow is 900 or more, I know I need almost 10% sample. So 1 in 10, right? 1 in 10. 10% means 1 in 10. Okay, so 1 in 10 here, when the flow is 900 or more. Similarly, if the flow is more than 700 to up to 899, again you come here, this value between these two. Okay, so 12.5% means 1 in 8. In every 8 cars you will stop 1. Okay, and again from 500, then you know it is almost 16.6%. So in every 6 car you will stop 1, and so on and so forth. So when the flow is less, so in this way you can design your survey data collection. So you will tell the people who are collecting data that in this hour of the day the flow is more than 900, so stop every one car in 10. In, let's say, in this time the flow is between 500 and 699, so stop one car in every 6 cars, and so on and so forth. So in when you have variation in flow, this is how you design your study. Okay, so I will stop here. If you have any questions, please go ahead. Any questions, confusion, clarification you need, please go ahead.
Yeah, Doctor, about the assignment, when will be the submission?
You have so tomorrow I will give you the responses to the people who don't have it. So you have one more week. So next Thursday.
Okay.
Okay, and then you will have the final submission.
The final submission you will tell us, or?
For the final submission, I already gave you the guidelines, but I will explain more. Once we finish this topic, I will explain.
Thank you, Doctor.
Okay, any other question?
No.
Okay, see you then next week. Have a nice week, and thank you for listening. Assalamu alaikum.